Hi, I'm Sheng. Welcome to my channel where I share tips, lessons, and strategies that bring us closer to the best versions of ourselves. Today, I want to share with you 4 lessons I learned from Thich Nhat Hanh's How to Love, a book that has really helped me out in all of my relationships. A little bit about Thich Nhat Hanh before we start. He is a Vietnamese Zen Buddhist monk who was actually exiled from his home country for his protests against the Vietnam War. He then moved to the south of France and started the organization Plum Village. He's the author of over 70 books on mindful living and was nominated by Martin Luther King for the Nobel Peace Prize. So he spent a lot of time teaching, meditating, and talking about intentional living, being more mindful in our relationships and in our lives so that we can be happier and more fulfilled. And before we start, a little bit about our surroundings. I'm in a forested area right next to a pretty cool abandoned building that I first found while walking around and exploring San Francisco. Ever since then, I thought it would be really cool to shoot a video here, and here we are. And if there's a little bit of background noise, that is one of the challenges of shooting outside. You never can tell what kind of noise levels, what kind of sound effects, what kind of interruptions might happen. But you know what? That's part of the fun and challenge of doing this. All right, guys, let's hit it. The book, How to Love, is actually really small. It's a tiny little handbook or compilation of passages about the act of loving, which is, something that has been written about, talked about for ages, and is actually quite a difficult thing to do properly. The first thing that I learned from Thich Nhat Hanh's How to Love is generous listening, where he says, to know how to love someone, we have to understand them. To understand, we need to listen. How often do someone, our loved ones, our friends, our partners come to us with their problems or wanting us to just listen where we are already thinking about how to problem solve or projecting our own biases and judgment on them, not giving them that room to just speak freely. Instead, we're already thinking about what to say next, right? We're thinking about not necessarily what they're saying, but how we can help or how we are reacting. And when we're doing that, we're actually not deeply listening. And they know it. They can tell. Often, our loved ones just want to be heard and be understood. I always believe that one of the greatest gifts that we can give each other as human beings is to bear witness to each other's lives and through that derive understanding. And deep and generous listening, that is literally letting the other person speak their mind, is one of the best ways to bear witness to their lives and experiences. And only through deep listening and understanding can we actually transform their suffering or figure out the right solution. Because otherwise, we're just projecting our own judgment and biases on them. Speaking of biases, the second thing that I learned from Thich Nhat Hanh is acceptance. Specifically, true love includes a sense of responsibility and accepting the other person as she is, with all her strengths and weaknesses. If you only like the best things in a person, that is not love. What I found often is that the very things that make us like a person can also be the things that make them difficult to love, right? So, for example, sometimes in my personal relationships, I really respect and love independence, as well as free thinking. But at the same time, these same attributes can make the same person aloof or distanced. If I accept just the good without the bad, that means I'm not really truly seeing them and understanding them. And in fact, I will probably be disappointed in them when they act in a certain way, right? When really they're just being true to their nature. So this is actually very much related to the Stoic concept of the true nature of things, right? Which means that in order to love the people around us, we have to accept their true natures, both the good and perhaps uncomfortable that comes out of that. The third lesson that I learned from Thich Nhat Hanh is reconciliation, especially with ourselves. It's hard to go through life without getting hurt. In fact, it's impossible, right? Either being hurt or hurting other people. It's part of the maturing process. But we don't always get an opportunity to reconcile with the other person because they are either separated by distance, time, they don't want to see us, or they're not even amongst us in this world anymore because they have passed. Which means that the most important person to reconcile with is actually ourselves. And Thich Nhat Hanh says, reconcile with yourself for the sake of the world, for the sake of all living things. Because if we don't reconcile with ourselves, we're always going to be living in the past, living with this baggage, right? And if we're not able to let go of that, we can't actually move forward and be present. And it doesn't just affect us, it actually affects everybody around us, our communities, our friends, our families. And once we're able to let go of that past, let go of that baggage, that is when we are able to start living in the present and start growing again. And we should do it for not just our sakes, but for everybody else around us. The fourth lesson that I learned from Thich Nhat Hanh is the greatest inheritance that parents can give to their children is their own happiness. I've seen this over and over again, where my happiest friends are those whose parents are actually happy. They have given them the roadmap to contentment. And the ones who are the most troubled in their lives. I'm not talking about ambition, wealth, or status. They can have all that. They can be really rich. They can be really successful, but they are not happy. And often it's because their parents are not happy. They came from a troubled family where their parents had a lot of issues growing up. In those instances, they have inherited their parents' unhappiness. So I think as we get older and we think about what we want to pass on to the next generation. It doesn't even be your own children, actually, right? It could be the young people that you touch at work. It could be in the classroom, right? It could be your mentees. Probably the most important thing is actually teaching them how to live, not what to do or, what to say, how to act, but actually the perspective that is going to allow them to deal with life better. Think about the times in which something made you truly happy and fulfilled. How can we recreate that? And how can we share that with others? I think my friend Brian did exactly this when we attended a festival earlier this year. While we were waiting for one of the sets and just being stuck together with other people, there were a few freshmen in college who were in the same group next to us. They struck up a conversation. It was kind of hilarious because one of them actually reminded him of his younger self back in college. And they were talking about, hey, what is it like to live your life? They were talking to Brian, right? They were like, wow, you traveled the world. You went to London, you went to Taipei, New York, you lived all the place. And you seem really happy. What's your secret? So he actually told them about his perspectives. And in fact, one of them actually reached out to him over LinkedIn afterwards, and they had a 45-minute call, at the end of which Brian actually felt great because he was like, yeah, I felt like I was the mentor that I never had because no one ever told me at the end of the day that the money and the status and all these ambition things that society tells us to chase doesn't matter as much as we think it does. That there are alternative routes to fulfillment and happiness. So I thought that was such a great thing for him to pass on to his younger self, essentially. The sun is setting behind me as always because I'm always choosing sunset to shoot these. It's got the best lighting, and I just really enjoy taking a evening stroll around this area. Thank you so much for joining me, for supporting me, and for listening. I hope this was helpful, and I hope to see you again soon.